Hello, everybody. Welcome to What's the Story podcast. This is WTS 317. And my name is Danny Murray.
And I'm Graham Merrigan.
All right. Graham, how are you this week? Last week, straight away, you were puffing the chest out. You were living the dream. You were elated after a late penalty involving Shamrock Rovers. This week, I'm expecting you to be absolutely devastated after another penalty incident involving Bohemians Football Club and Shamrock Rovers. And then also you've lost in Europe. So I'm expecting you to be miserable.
I was miserable Saturday morning.
Good enough for me. That's all I need to hear. Thanks very much. So this week on the podcast.
That game was dreadful. I know you didn't watch it because you're not a real supporter, but
Withdraw that comment.
Absolutely dreadful. So yeah, out of the cup again.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed.
I did go up and watch friend of the show, Ross Sambra's team, Wayside, take part in the same competition at the same round, and they gave a great account of themselves against Wexford Football Club, and they lost 3-1, but it was a great occasion. Wayside's pitch is like a carpet. It's better than some League of Ireland pitches. It's actually better than Dalymount Park. So that was good. And then obviously Rovers, they lost at home to Sparta Prague. Again, gave a good account of themselves, but I think Sparta Prague were in third gear and they didn't even need to get into fifth gear.
I heard that they were over in Papa John's in the square before the game, loading up on chicken dippers and pizza. That's how lightly they were taking the occasion.
Probably.
I don't even know if Papa John's is still over in the square, does it?
I actually don't know.
Love Papa John's, me. This episode of the podcast...
Is there Papa John's down in your neck of the woods?
There absolutely is, yeah. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Papa John's. View yourself. I think wherever there's a Supermax, there's a Papa John's. I think that's how they have the franchise, I believe. So,
very good.
And because I live outside Dublin, there's a Supermax on every corner. So, yeah. Yeah. There's actually...
I do like Supermax.
Listen, their chicken is actually delicious and fair. I hate your man, Pat. What you call him? Pat.
The owner's an absolute bellend. That doesn't pay his workers properly.
Yeah, he's a fluke, but he makes a nice bit of chicken. I'll give him that. Their chicken burger and their chicken tenders are absolutely unrivaled.
They just pay our workers right, Mr. Supermax man, whoever you are.
Yeah, exactly. Right, do we need to do any preamble or will we just go straight into our guest?
Do we need to do any preamble? I think just go into the guest.
All right, then. Our guest this week is the brilliant Hilary McGann, journalist who is based over in Boston, across the water, the amazing city and home of the current NBA champions, the Boston Celtics. And, well, we're all trying to figure out what the hell is going on in America. So let's just go over to Hilary and see what's happening. I'm absolutely delighted to say that Hilary McGann joins us now. And for those of you not familiar with Hilary, you can check out News by Hill. That's probably the best place to find her. And she's just launched a Patreon where she's chatting to authors, the Booked In podcast. And some of you might be familiar with her from Ireland AM as well. But Hilary, thank you so much for joining us and trying to help us make sense of what's going on across the pond.
Thank you both so much. I feel like it's one of the moments where you feel like maybe I'm about to make it. I'm being asked for people want to hear from me.
Yeah,
but no, jokes aside, really thrilled to be asked on. Thank you so much.
Not at all. So, right, look, me and Mero we're constantly trying to make sense of just what is going on. And over the last couple of weeks, it feels like the level of just madness has turned up a notch between assassination attempts, Biden dropping out, claims of all sorts in terms of is actually democratic from the Democrats. What's going on, Hilary? Make it make sense for us.
Well, I feel like every day lately has been so much breaking news, and it's kind of even hard to wrap your head around. You mentioned Ireland AM there, and this was mad to me. I was thinking about it the other day, that early June I went on and I was chatting to Tommy and Alan, and I was talking about the fact that it was just off the back of Donald Trump's conviction, right? The convicted on 34 counts. I was in there chatting to them, and I was back a month later. And within that month, you had Hunter Biden's trial and conviction. You had the disastrous debate. You had calls for Biden to step down. Within a week after that, you had the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You had the immunity ruling with the Supreme Court. You had the classified documents trial dismissed. And like, that was a month. And I thought, oh my good God, I have 4 months to go here. I'm cancelling anything social I have done. Nobody is allowed to come to Boston to visit in October. I honestly, and at the same time, you know what, I will say, like, as a journalist, and I've been a journalist for, about 8 years now. And while it's mental and it's breaking news and news breaks at the weekend and it's chaotic and it's all those things, I do try and take a step back and say, this is a fun story to cover. As far as journalism goes, a lot of the news is deeply important, but incredibly tragic. And so to be able to, whack up a few memes of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris on Instagram, like, how bad, like, it's a fine job, and it's wild. I don't know about you guys, but I'm quite sarcastic, and I moved to Boston, and I find with Americans, sometimes they just don't get my humor, my dry sense of humor. And I tease a lot. And I'm like, Americans think that they're the center of the universe and like the leaders of the free world. And I joke about that. And then I turn around to my husband and I'm like, oh, but Michigan is critical for the election. And you're going, oh my God, maybe it is. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I'm talking about towns in Arizona and Michigan and their history of politics. And I thought about it one day, and I thought, like, what if there was a couple in New York watching an Irish election being like, Leitrim is vital. Do you know what I mean? And I went,
Leitrim was common border.
Exactly. And I just thought, like, maybe actually, maybe I was a bit wrong to be teasing too much, because here I am. But yeah, it's wild. It's exciting to be in Boston. But it's been good fun. But I am honestly bracing myself for what could possibly come next in this election cycle. It's mental.
It is, and I think it's interesting as well that you point that out in terms of we we all make fun of this, system that America has, and this sort of psychosis that Americans have, where they do think it's the center of the universe, and yet for the next 4 months, the vast majority of us will be absolutely glued to, and it will be front page news over here as much as it is over there, and we're all going to sit here in early November glued to John, what you call him, and his magic wall on CNN.
John King.
John King, thank you. Yeah. And watch as they talk about counties that we've never heard of in, back end of Oklahoma, or the back end of Arizona, or wherever. And we're all going to sit there and absorb every last bit of it, going, Jesus, if that's not looking good for her, trying to predict how the state is going to go.
Become experts.
It's, as you said, Harry, it is wild, but that is the impact that this election is going to have.
It is. And I feel like it sounds very cheesy, because in 2016, everybody was saying, well, actually, sorry, let's take it back. For as long as I've been following elections, right, there was obviously, I was way too young, because I'm so young now, but in 2000, that election was mental with Al Gore, and it went into the Supreme Court, and that felt monumental. And then you had 2004, Bush was trying to get reelected. And, the Iraq war is going on, and that was hugely consequential of what kind of trajectory the US foreign policy would go. Then you had 2008. It felt so historic for so many people that Obama would be elected, his re-election. And then Donald Trump comes in against Hillary Clinton, and everybody was saying, this is the most unprecedented election ever. And it genuinely felt that way at the time. And then people felt the same about 2020, because it was, off the back of COVID, and is he going to be reelected? And here we are in 2024. And I think people are right saying, no, this is the unprecedented election. Yeah. And I'm like, when are we going to have an election that people will say, do you know what? Like, it's big, but it's not the biggest ever, because it just feels like, how much more can we escalate,
It would be nice to have a boring election, I suppose.
Oh, pleasure. Now, I will say, I also know that myself, I'm not alone as a journalist living for this. I started at CNN in 2016, slap bang in the middle of Brexit had just happened, and we were looking towards November. And it was absolutely riveting, regardless of your politics, regardless of what you think. It was an insane time. Like we used to look at shows and the programs for the shows, and they would
Mm.
genuinely leave blank segments in case Donald Trump tweeted. And it would go into, they just had to be flexible. And it was just this wild time where he would be, you know, being discussed and debated over something very, very serious. And then he would just fire somebody and you'd have to go
Yeah.
to that breaking news. And it was like, we can't even keep up with it. And so, I understand that for Americans that are progressive and Democrats and left leaning, it was a very difficult, awful time. But as a journalist, it was extraordinary.
And I think
And
that's,
he made so
so,
much money.
yeah, well, yeah, yeah. But I think that's like you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of that piece around like we kind of over the last 4 years where we've kind of managed to catch our breath somewhat, we forget that like news wasn't breaking, it was tweeting, and it was Donald Trump that was tweeting it usually, or if Donald Trump was speaking anywhere, you were liable to have some sort of story break. Like even yesterday in a WhatsApp group, me and Mary were in, somebody shared it's a video where it's comparing Obama announcing the death of Osama bin Laden versus Trump announcing the death of the leader of ISIS.
It's so funny, but it's so annoying as well.
I think it's one of the most extraordinary matchups. And it literally, like, it cuts to Trump and he's like, he died like a dog, and you're going, oh my God.
Yeah, it's just
They kicked the door down.
Yeah, I was gonna say even the bit where he's like, most people would go through the front door, knock knock. Yeah, you're like, so what is going on
Then he
here?
started talking about book sales, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah. At the end of it, he mentioned his book or something. Like he's just, and that's the kind of thing that.
What do you make of like say like I'm not uptight. I love sarcasm. I love jokes and stuff, but I do like with Trump. I get annoyed at him, and then I get annoyed at people. Ah, Trump's deadly, isn't he? And it's like, no, he's not deadly. He's dangerous. What's it like
Well,
over there in that?
Well, do you know what? To be honest with you, it's so lovely to be chatting to you guys about politics because I find it just so difficult here. And, one of the big things on my Instagram is I try and stay as impartial as possible. It is not for
Mm,
me to tell anybody how to think, feel, or vote. And I actually think it'd be quite arrogant for me to do that as a journalist. And so I take a nuanced approach, right? But that nuance that to me is so important in storytelling and reporting doesn't translate that well here because it's so polarized. So, you know, any sort of positive statement about either candidate is seen sometimes as an outright endorsement. And I'll give you an example is I do think, and I'll slightly not disagree with you, but I do think we will look back on Donald Trump and this period in US politics, and there will be, don't get me wrong, lots of things to say. I think one thing that will be said as well is that he has the most extraordinary instinct for the TV moment
mm,
and to go viral in a way that you just haven't seen before. I mean, if you needed any example, it was the assassination attempt. I mean, who has a bullet go past them, Secret Service all over them, and whether you agreed with the decision or not, him knowing that photo, you couldn't Photoshop it better. It was
yeah.
blue sky, American flag, blood on his face, fist in the air. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I think actually, if you were to ignore his funny moments or those kind of that political instinct, it wouldn't be telling the full story about Donald Trump. Now, what I try to do on Instagram is meme, really important fact, meme, context, meme, fact, So I think there's a delicate balance for sure. I don't know that I always get it correct, but
Mm.
you can't deny he's the character that he is. I mean, he's me. And when he wasn't running for president, everybody in media world loved him because he brought the ratings.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
what Danny's been saying since
Mm.
Brexit. Like we're living in a simulation.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
definitely feels like it. It definitely feels like we're
It
in like
feels just
look,
so mad.
And we
Like the
can't get
world,
off.
not exclusive to America, but America's supposed to be the shining light and everyone's supposed to look up to. And I as well as that, Irish fascination with American presidents, I find that really off-putting as well for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you know what? Again, I'm going to be critical of myself here. is even going to the point of, I know the religions and the politics of every Supreme Court justice in the US. I'm ashamed to say I don't think I could name a Supreme Court judge in Ireland. Like, I mean,
That's mental.
how pathetic.
And you probably shouldn't. You probably shouldn't.
Yeah, you shouldn't in many ways. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a testament to the Irish legal system, don't get me wrong, but it's also,
Yeah.
I'm highlighting my own fucking obsession. Like, I mean, I was on holiday September 2020 with my husband, and he was making dinner, and I came out and I was like, oh my God, he thought something had gone wrong. And he was like, what's wrong? And I was like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died. And he was like, okay, sorry, you're going to have to give a bit of context. Like, who's Ruth? I was like, no, we don't know her. I was like, she's the Supreme Court justice. Like, but I was trying to convey to him, I was like, the Republicans are going to try and get somebody
Yeah.
in. It's going to change the balance of the Supreme Court. And I was hearing myself going, Jesus Christ, like,
You sound like a character in the newsroom, Hilary.
It's honestly, I feel like, but this is the weird thing is at the moment, the way the news has been, certainly in the last few weeks, but in general over the last few years, like if it was a TV show, I mean, if there was West Wing now about the politics in the last, 2 months in the US, we'd all be switching off going like, look, the writers are trying to pack so much in here. This is just ridiculous,
Yeah.
That's it. And you're right as well, because I mean, like 20 years ago, if somebody was making a joke about bribery, they'd reference Bertie Ahern. Now they're referencing Clarence Thomas. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there is a spread here in terms of that influence and that knowledge that we've no reason at all to know or really care about, the 7 Supreme Court justices and the conservative versus the liberal and all the kind of stuff that goes on there. And yet we do. We know the names that, for as you said, I 100% could not name an Irish Supreme Court justice, but I can name at least 3 or 4 of the American ones, at least.
I don't even know Ireland's Attorney General.
Like, this is the way we consume American politics and American culture. And I think that's why coming up to November, we're all just going to be glued to it. And even over the next couple of days. So, like, Kamala Harris is now the Democratic candidate. We don't know who her VP candidate is going to be yet, but that's going to be the talk of the town. From your side of things over there on the ground, Hilary, is there any strong indicators as to who we can expect to see on the ticket with her?
Well, I don't say this sarcastically or flippantly at all, but I think straight away you could have. Some people were talking about Gretchen Whitmer, and I was like, no, it's going to be a man, and it's most likely going to be a white man. Let's be realistic about this. Whether you think that's correct or not, that's going to be the call that's made. And so you're looking at it saying, okay, what's the balance here? And I think, to be honest, they haven't named it yet, as you said, but they're looking at, I think there's 3. There's 2 governors, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, North Carolina, and then there's an Arizona senator called Mark Kelly. And I think, like, I don't know, obviously, but I think based on just what I'm seeing on social media from political kind of analysts and experts and all that, and the news I'm watching, I think people are expecting that of the 3, it could be Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. But let's see. I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of people obviously with the election are looking at November, and it all happens in November, yes. But we're going to know this very soon because the Democratic National Convention is August 19th. And I think given the way everything's unfolded, I think they're going to want to get that name out there soon, get people knowing them. But really, I mean, a vice presidential candidate is just really to complement. It's not going to be like a shining figure. I think somebody that would have been really interesting, maybe they're in the running, I have no idea, is Pete Buttigieg. He is the transport secretary in the US at the moment, but he actually is a very interesting guy. And I want you guys to ask me to come back on this podcast when he runs for president and becomes a Democratic nominee, because I'm absolutely convinced it's going to happen one day. I think he's very young, so probably waiting, for his right time. But he ran in 2020 and he actually did very, very well in the primary process. Like at the beginning, he was ahead of Biden. He bowed out. He became transport secretary. He's been very, very supportive of, and I think a very good voice for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. He ripped into JD Vance over the weekend on Bill Maher's show and viral. But what I think is so interesting about him, and why I think it would be a very interesting choice were she to make it, I don't think she will, let's see, is because Pete Buttigieg was the mayor of a town, I think it was South Bend in Indiana, which is Mike Pence's state, right? So Republican leaning. But he seems quite centered in his politics. And he is a military veteran. He speaks, I think, 7 languages. He's a classical pianist. He's a gay man. And what I thought was so interesting, right, is a lot of people will say, oh, is America ready for a gay president? I don't know. I can't answer that, right? I'm sure there's a huge core of the electorate that are not.
Mm.
But when he was running in 2020, he was one of the very, very few Democrat candidates that did a town hall on Fox News. And number one, the fact that he was gay was, I think, the 5th thing that was listed about him, which is why I listed it in that order as well. And number two, off the back of the town hall, at the end of it, he got a standing ovation on Fox News.
Yeah.
Fox, wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And I thought that's somebody to watch. He might struggle. Maybe he wouldn't be the way the system is mad here, because on the one hand, he might not be progressive and left-leaning enough to get the Democratic nominee. But I think if he was to get the nomination and then the election of the actual election itself, I think he would do so well, because I think he would bring in Republicans who are very anti-Trump, or independents who are undecided. I mean, the independents, to be honest, we talk all the time, like blue, red, Democrat, Republican. The undecided independent voters are the biggest cohort, and they're up for grabs.
Absolutely.
So, anyway.
No, and it's interesting because, like, as news was breaking last Sunday, where Biden bowed out, and myself and Mero were going back and forth. He was one person at the time. I said Raphael Warnock potentially, but it looks like he's not in the running now at this stage. But Mark Kelly is an interesting one because his background's impressive. He's an astronaut, and his wife. There was an assassination attempt on his wife. She was the senator before him, I think, wasn't it? Or am I getting
Yes,
mixed up?
yeah. I think so, yeah. And I think what's also interesting about Mark Kelly is, obviously, when you look at the election and the way the election process happens, a lot of times it's about kind of where you're from as well.
Yeah.
And he's from Arizona. And obviously, Arizona, probably from a political point of view, would be most well known as John McCain's state. And he was the senator there for decades. And it was, for a very, very long time, a Republican state, right? I mean, it was kind of one of those ones where in a lot of election cycles, there was very little campaigning even there. It was so safe. John McCain was so popular. And Donald Trump really insulted John McCain supporters in Arizona.
Yeah.
He talked about his record. I mean, this guy is seen, he passed away, I think 5 years ago. He was seen as an American hero. He was a prisoner of war. He couldn't lift his arm up, I think, because of injuries he sustained. Yeah.
From torture,
Yeah, exactly. And Donald Trump made a number of comments, but one of them was kind of, I don't know exactly, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but Donald Trump insulted him many, many times. And that came home to bite him, because in 2020, Arizona turned blue and they voted for Joe Biden. And a lot of that came down to Cindy McCain, John McCain's widow, endorsing Joe Biden, who was he was a very good friend of the McCain family. And so it would be very interesting to see if they chose Mark Kelly. I think that would be a very strategic call to make with Arizona, to see 2 years in a row put a vote for a Democrat and then truly be a battleground state. I think it would be fascinating. Let's see.
What do you think we're expecting at the Democratic Convention in terms of what will they want the message to be put across? What will people be talking about after it, do you think? Because obviously, with the Republican convention last weekend, everyone was talking about the appearance of Hulk Hogan and Trump's speech. And it was just, again, I'll use the phrase, it was like a fucking simulation. Like, what business has Hulk Hogan got on stage at a Republican convention? Like, or what influence has he got on the American public, where they're actually kind of looking at it and saying, oh, this is influential, this is brilliant, I'm going to do this now because Hulk Hogan told me to.
Yeah, I suppose. But at the same time, you look at Democrats, they've used a lot of celebrities too. I think that's just the American culture, the American way in many ways, I think at the convention, what can you expect? I don't know. I think they're going to try and capitalize on how historic it could be were she to be elected, what it means. And because, has she been the most popular vice president? I don't think so. I don't think she's also been the most present, like the most visible vice president. So
Yeah.
maybe a lot of that isn't her fault. Fine. But I think what they're going to do is lean on the idea of this could be the first female president. Hillary Clinton wrote a piece in the New York Times today, kind of echoing the same thing of like, let's not let this slip away, was very quick to endorse her. And so I think they're gonna use that a lot. They're gonna speak to that a lot. I think there's gonna be a lot of, we've seen what a Trump administration looks like, reflecting back, warnings about what the detrimental impact it could have on US society. I think there's going to be a really heavy focus on a woman's right to choose. That's a very, very popular stance within the Democrat Party. And what they can do with that, I don't know, because I mean, the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court, but nevertheless, they'll heavily campaign on that, I think. Um, I think it'll be really interesting. I think they'll be very gracious and graceful towards Joe Biden. I'm fascinated
Yeah.
to see what kind of an appearance he's going to make, if any, there. I think it'd be unusual if he wasn't to do anything.
Mm.
But I'm really intrigued to see what Obama does, because Obama's yet to actually endorse her.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned there. I read a piece earlier in the week, but the author was getting across that this election in November could end up being a referendum for women's rights. And I thought that was a very interesting way to put it because of Roe versus Wade in that context. Do you think we could see a potential, what we've seen in France in terms of an uprising? And could that something like that get Harris over the line, do you reckon?
I think so. I think there's a lot of one policy voters, and a lot of people are very angry about what has happened. There was a precedent in the US for decades. I think it was 1972, Roe v. Wade. It all kind of started from there, that whole system. And yeah, I think there's a lot of anger for sure. And I think what's really interesting is, I was doing a bit of research the other day and I was looking back. This is the nerd in me now, but I was watching back one of the debates that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump did back in 2016. And, she said at the time, she said, the Supreme Court is the central issue at stake in this election. And obviously, that didn't make headlines. What made headlines was her saying it's awfully good that somebody like Donald Trump isn't in control. And then he's like, yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Yeah.
Like that just dominated that moment. But again, he's a genius because that dominated. But when I look back, I think how right she was, regardless of what you think, regardless of your politics, he had the opportunity and she would have had the opportunity to nominate 3 Supreme Court justices. Unbelievable. I mean, the impact that will have on US society will have a trickle effect for decades, And so, yeah, I think it will be. But again, I mean, okay, let's be realistic. Kamala Harris gets elected in November. What can she do? Like
Yeah.
within reason, I mean, I'm sure there are things she can do, but ultimately the Supreme Court, the states brought it to the Supreme Court. What is very interesting to me is actually Donald Trump's flip-flopping on his stance. He was taking full credit for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And now I think I've seen polling, and it's not a very popular call, this outright, this idea of a federal ban on abortion. And
Yeah.
now rolling it back and saying, no, 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 what I brought it to the states to decide. So I don't know how it's all going to play out, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Democrats use it and use it frequently.
It'd be interesting to see at their convention if they bring it up in the context of, like you said there, a lot of voters are one policy voters, and this is hugely important to people. So it would be interesting to see if they took the tactic post the referendum, or sorry, the convention, that, like, at post convention, are we talking about, oh wow, they did actually go down that road? They are pillaring it like this is a referendum for women's rights. It'd be so interesting. I did see a piece. Uh, it was before Biden stepped aside, but there was a woman speaking, and she said that because of certain rules and certain estate that she was brought up on, she was forced to give birth to a child at 12 years of age, where her stepfather raped her. Now we know JD Vance. Is that his name? JD
Yeah.
Vance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He he is 100% abortion with no, whether it's rape, whether it's incest, he doesn't give a shite. So, I mean, that seems like not to put it flippantly, because it is a serious, very, very serious topic, but that seems to be a winning choice, no?
Yeah, yeah. I think actually what is another interesting point is the idea, and this is just a feeling that I have, like I don't have any data to back this, obviously, but uh, I think when I look back at 2016 and 2020, the people that voted, in a lot of cases, obviously not all, it was a vote against the other candidate,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I
Protesto.
think, yeah, and I suppose in like 2008, you think about people weren't voting against John McCain because they they would have a lot of Democrats would have recognized, like, look, I don't agree with his policies, but I think he's a good man, and I don't think our democracy would feel, vulnerable if he was to win. It felt like a vote for Obama, that they were inspired to vote for him. I think a lot of people in 2016 thought that that same sentiment would come through in terms of the woman's vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't think it really did, to be honest.
Mm.
But even if you look at the last few days, I know it is early days, but it feels like there's a lot of excitement for Kamala Harris amongst Democrats. And it's not just simply like it was in 2020 in a lot of cases. I'm voting to make sure Donald Trump doesn't get back in. It's like I'm voting because I want Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and it's mad because in 24 hours she raised something like $100 million, which outdid Twisters at the box office. So you can say Kamala Harris is Hollywood anyway. But I think like it's fast because what you're saying there, Hillary, as well is fascinating because and I don't even know if it's worth talking about or not, but like the sidewinder in all of this is the third candidate in RFK.
Hmm.
And uh, like a vote for him, in essence, is kind of a vote for Trump, or has it now swung the opposite way, where if they vote for RFK,
What party is RFK representing?
he's
He's
independent.
independent.
Yeah,
So
he's
Yeah,
he,
independent.
there's Cornel West as well, isn't there?
He's not going like RFK is polling at least in a couple of the like has a couple of percentage points, like enough that he could
RFK Jr.
potentially.
could, yeah, RFK Jr. could really be a spoiler candidate in many respects. And I
Yeah,
think, what is interesting, right, is that it's fascinating the fact that he started as a Democrat and then last October he announced that he was going to run as an independent, basically because he was going to get no debate against Biden. The primary
mm,
process was going to go, the delegates were going to go to Biden, and he decided to go as an independent. What I find so fascinating is the fact that there's different polls all the time about who it would impact more, who he'd spoil votes from even more. And I think that's a story in and of itself. The fact
yeah,
that, you could leave the Democrat Party and potentially hurt Trump more, or, the idea that it's not 100% clear speaks to just how interesting it is, because you have such a wide variety of people that support RFK Jr. Not a
yeah.
huge amount, but a wide variety in terms of like the voters and what their policies would be.
Yeah, and in an election that is going to arguably be like neck and neck, it is going to be extremely close. Like that RFK, that even if it is just sort of 2%, 3% that vote for him, like those votes could be so important to the final outcome of whoever it is going to win in November. I'm conscious of time and us taking up a lot of your evening in what is a busy, busy evening. Well, not of the news on the background. Benjamin Netanyahu was currently addressing
He
Congress.
said they're getting about 20 standing ovations in Congress.
Yeah,
It feels sick.
we've got
Yeah.
Biden making an address this evening as well, and Trump has a rally. So you probably have a lot to try and get through tonight as well.
No, don't worry about it. I mean, this is honestly a pleasure. I love it. Sure, I could chat about US politics all the time. But I actually think, when we're talking about a spoiler, right? And you were
Yeah,
saying, I think you made a really good point of like, he could really impact the outcome of the election. And I really want to do a deep dive on my Instagram soon about the election in 2000 and just how mental that was. Like
yeah,
the call wasn't made for nearly a good few weeks. It went to the Supreme Court. But one of the aspects of that story is the fact that there was a guy, Nader, was it what was his name? Ralph Nader, I think.
mm,
And he
Oh, yeah,
ran,
rings a bell.
and yeah, he ran as a third party, right? And a lot of people would say it hugely impacted Al Gore, that he took
yeah,
votes from Al Gore. And when it came down to a few thousand votes in that election, you have to wonder, if he hadn't been in it, would Al Gore have won? And if he had won, oh my God, you think, Bush was in office. 9 months when 9/11 happened, how would Al Gore have reacted? And I know that that's all like, what if, what if? But it really speaks to the difference it can make.
Big time.
Do you know what I find? Do you know what I find very funny when I'm looking at American politics, and you'll have a lot of Trump supporters. You'll even hear see Trump himself, and he'll be like, "Let's keep the socialists out. We don't want any commies." There's no socialism in America.
It's the most expensive place on the planet. And I do find, actually, sorry, you can hear my puppy coming in now. Hello.
What's his
Yeah,
name or her name?
Bree. She's absolutely divine. I picked her up 2 weeks ago. And the love of my life. But anyway, sorry. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I mean, what I find, I actually do find it very uncomfortable, how sharp the divide is here. Like, you're wealthy or you're poor. And don't get me wrong, of course there's a middle class, but it's just, it just feels like a sharper divide. And you look around and you're like, there's so much money here. It's just insane. Insane.
None of it makes sense though, doesn't it? I remember watching the count night for the last presidential election, and they were talking. It was Downey O'Sullivan. He was talking on the ground to Trump supporters, and every second word was like, "We don't need no socialism. We don't need no commies." But there's no socialist candidates. Cornel West, but he's not even polling. They're believing in their own insecurity that there's socialism in the country when it's a capitalist pig of a state.
Oh God, I know.
Sorry to put it across like that when you live there.
Say, Mero, yeah, don't be landing Hillary in hot water now. So play out a scenario for the staying Hillary. Right, where like we've covered off some bits, and there's a million miles more that we could go down, right? But let's fast forward to November. It's, the 6th of November, you've got on the red line, you're heading out to Harvard to go to Mr. Bartley's Burger Cottage, the greatest burger on the planet. And you're digesting not only a delicious burger, but you're also digesting an election result. What are we staring down the barrel of?
Well, I think it's going to be, I don't know. I don't know. If you asked me last week, I swear to God, I would have said this is done. After the assassination attempt and the RNC, watching all that, I was like, this is just done. I mean, and let's be real here. Like, there's all these national pollings, and it's, at the moment, for example, it's funny when you look at media in the US, it just depends where you look, what kind of spin you're going to get. So, Fox News is, Trump is still ahead, and he is. I think the latest poll was like 49-46 with Kamala Harris. But then you look at other media outlets, and it's, Kamala Harris narrows the gap. So that's
it's within the margin of error, isn't it?
But the reality is, right, we can focus too much on national polling. To understand the US system and the way that an election is voted is to understand the fact that it all is going to come down to a few million votes in a few states. And when you look at the last few weeks, it's been very steady. Now, sorry, I say this up to when Joe Biden was still running. There were 7 battleground states, and Trump was ahead, and comfortably ahead, in 6 out of those 7. And in the 7th, I think it was Wisconsin, Biden wasn't ahead. It was a neck and neck. So what I'm fascinated by, and I think it'll take 2 to 3 weeks, is what impact Kamala Harris now stepping into the race will have on those states, because they're the ones that matter. Let's be real.
Yeah. And I think that's it's 100% true, because we know there are states that are red. They've been red. They'll always be red. There's states that are blue. They've been blue, and they'll always be blue. So those swing states or those battleground states, it is all going to come down to, and they're the ones that we're all going to be glued to in November. It'll be really interesting to see, as you said, over the next couple of weeks, how and if those polls or the numbers in those states look like they're going to shift. Stuff like that, like we said at Netanyahu, who's addressing the Congress at the moment, like, Kamala Harris has a slightly more or a slightly less favourable stance towards him. The fact that she's not presiding over Netanyahu speaking, these sort of things may impact how people feel in terms of, like, we've seen sympathy towards Palestine increase in the US.
How effective is that, Danny, that she's not presiding over that?
I think it's one of them where it's kind of like they're saying that she had an engagement already lined up or whatever, but I think it speaks volumes, I would say, in terms of that relationship. Netanyahu wants a Trump win, and in terms of what that means going forward or whatever. But I think it'd be really interesting to see if that impacts any of the people, because there's been a bit of a sort of tetchy relationship for Biden with voters over the Israel situation, I think.
Yeah, but I find it fascinating here in the US that there I'll put it this way, there's nobody that's going to be elected president of the US that is going to be anti-Israel.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
might be slightly more nuanced. They might be slightly more conscious of voter approval. But there's no administration that is going to be openly, overtly anti-Israel. I mean, if you look back, even the last 20 years, maybe you could say Obama had the most tense relationship with Netanyahu. They
Mm.
really didn't get on. He really undermined him by speaking in Congress when he went, and Obama, he made a lot of statements condemning the settlements, the expansion of the settlements. Really tense. I'm reading a brilliant book by Barack Ravid, and there's also it's really interesting insight into the whole dynamic of the idea of like US politics. There's very few things, it's so polarizing. There's very few things that they align on. And the overall, I mean, pre-October 7th, the overall support to Israel is something that is just it's bipartisan,
Yeah.
and I think it's just more nuanced. And I
Yeah,
think it goes back to the point that we're making about where the election will really play out. And one of those battleground states, I mean, I joked about it earlier, being self-deprecating, but Michigan is going to be vital because, the Democrats, it's got the largest Arab American population in the US.
Yeah.
More than 100,000 people in a protest vote in the primaries voted uncommitted. And I was going to say Joe Biden, Kamala Harris cannot afford to lose those voters because it's more than the margin in which Joe Biden won in 2020. And so, the support for the Palestinian support or anti-Israel support in Michigan can't be underestimated, what impact it could have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, as I said, like the leaning undecided, the numbers in that are huge, and in those battleground states, that like as you were just saying a minute ago, that's where this will be won and lost. Like, it's not going to be won and lost in California. It's not going to be won or lost in Texas. It is going to be the likes of Michigan. It is going to be so. Yeah, it's all to play for, and it's, as I said, we're all going to be glued to it for the next few months anyway. And we'll definitely be getting in touch with you come November to help us try and make sense of whatever that result looks like, Hilary. But
The
until
pleasure would be all
then,
mine.
if people want to get more of you, and I know I briefly mentioned your Patreon at the start of it, but give it a kind of proper mention so that we do it justice rather than me uttering what you actually do and how good it is.
Oh, here we go. Stop me now if I'm rambling, okay? But okay, Instagram is News by Hill, and on that page, basically, I just try and have fun with the news where I can. So I post updates every day, a general sense of what's going on, but I also do deep dives on Instagram, and they take 100 slides. I'll take one topic and I'll run through it all, and I never take a position. I'm
Hmm.
literally just trying to tell the story. So I feel very connected to my audience. I absolutely love it. My dad checks my follower numbers every day, so please follow. Please follow. And I also have a podcast series that you spoke about earlier very generously. Thank you. And that's called Booked In. And it's basically wherever you get your podcasts. And I speak once a week to an author about the book they've written and the topic they've covered, nonfiction, but anything from kind of geopolitics to deeply personal memoirs. I've absolutely adored it. And it's been very well received so far. I'm delighted. And yeah, so Instagram and the podcast, I think, is the best place.
Amazing. And do check out News by Hill and give Hilary a follow. It's brilliant stuff there. But for now, Hilary, thank you so much for your time. Godspeed in trying to make sense of all this over the next few months. But we'll all be tuning in and we'll all be looking forward to talking to you again. It come results, well, just after results day in November. But until then, thank you very much.
Thank you. When you were saying Godspeed there, I thought you were about to say God bless America. I was like, Jesus, Danny, you've had an impact.
Thanks so much, Harry.
Yeah, I'm not quite at that stage just yet. I wouldn't be surprised by November though. The propaganda will get me like so.
No, but jokes aside, thank you so much, guys. I've absolutely adored it. Hope to be on again soon, and the pleasure was all mine.
A lovely chat with a lovely human. I think it's one of them. And do check out News by Hill, lads. It's a good page, but also her Instagram account is very good for just trying to give you the news while also trying to make it digestible and not make you want to just scratch your eyes out because you're sick of seeing the news. Um, I think we'll have to take an American detox for a couple of weeks, Graham, or at least try to. And then,
Yeah, we'll keep it to the WhatsApp.
yeah, and then we'll reload and go again closer to the election. And we'll ask Hillary to come back on. And we'll get an update on our puppy who made a brief appearance and who got a brief mention. And we didn't ask enough questions about the puppy. I think we can both agree on that. Our journalistic spidey senses didn't kick in enough to ask more questions about Bree the puppy. We don't know
No.
what breed she is. We don't know what colour she is. We don't know. All we know is that Hillary has her about 2 weeks and is the love of her life. But we need to know more. We need to know more. Suggsy wants to know more. Lupo and Polly want to know more. Just, generally
And we'll
speaking.
get more in October.
We will. We'll get a Bree update before we get into the meat of the election in America. But anyway, that's it for this week. Check out newsbyhill.com. Check out WTS Pod wherever you get your podcasts, and there's 300 odd episodes. 9 years worth of content, lads. 9 long, hard, mad, weird, crazy, just unbelievable, unfathomable, that word, years of chaos, mayhem, fun, shenanigans, giggles, laughs, occasional sex talk, and of course, food. Not sex talk between me and Graham. We had a sexologist on the podcast. Me and Graham didn't go blue for an episode, Ratton. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was just, yeah. Anyways, WTSpod.com or WTSpod, wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you away next week?
No, the following week.
Following week.
I'm away for a couple of days. I'm not away for the full. I'm going over to watch the lovely Adele do a lovely concert in the lovely city of Munich, in the lovely country of Germany, on the lovely continent of Europe, on the lovely planet of Earth.
That's going to be class. We'll have to hear about that when we'll have to hear a good review of that.
I will happily give my review of lovely Adele in lovely Munich. And thankfully Aer Lingus have got their shit together, so it looks like I'll actually have a flight, which is nice.
Yeah. They need to sort themselves out, Aer Lingus, making all those profits. Pay your workers.
Pay your fair wage for fair work. Vote Merrigan, number 1.
Yeah. I'm straight.
All right, look, let's get out of here. Until next week.
Local elections, I'll be there. Until next week.
Hang on, did you just drop an exclusive there at the very end of the episode?
Let's see.
All right, go on. Until next week, Graham.
Your eyes.
Full hearts.
Can't lose. Too sweet.